Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. On the behalf of the International Fund for Agricultural Development and Wageningen University and Research Centers, who are the organizing of this 1 hour event, I would like to apologize for the technical problems that we encountered. And we're going to try to make sure that the presentation and the session will last within the time frame and maybe only 15 minutes late. So the session will run until 1:30, and the presenter of this session will address their presentation, and this will be followed by a discussion. This is an important session affiliated to the pre-food summit, pre-food system summit event on food system transformation for rural prosperity. In this session, we are going to take a close look at all the challenge of the food system and the key drivers of change and potential game-changing solution in line with the Food System Summit that is taking place in New York in September 23. This dialogue that we're having today is highly based on the work that was conducted for the preparation of the flagship of the IFAD, the Rural Development Report. The Rural Development Report is IFAD published publication, which comes out every 3 years and is going to be published by early September 2021, and it focuses on food system transformation for rural prosperity. It promotes equitable livelihood for rural people since they are front and center in transforming food system, alongside the need to improve nutrition and protect the environment. The global need for more nutritious food, ecosystem, service, and a carbon economy also offer the potential for new and innovative livelihood opportunity. The session today will start with a short interventions focusing on the key aspect related to the different food system dimension to ensure rural prosperity, poverty and implication for food system, nutrition, diet, environment, and governance, which are the key drivers of the Food System Summit. The panel will provide insight on these topics and respond to questions from all of you in the chat. So now we're going directly into the first presentation by Romina Cavatassi, who has led the publication of the RDR in IFAD and who is also the coordinator of the impact assessment agenda of the institution. Prior to this role, Romina was lead technical specialist for environment and climate in the Environment and Climate Division of IFAD. Her work aims at generating evidence for decision and policymaking, making use of research and impact assessment with a special focus on climate change, natural resource economics, and poverty alleviation. She has a vast experience in survey design, training, data collection, database management, data analysis and management. And prior to joining IFAD, Romina worked for FAO as a natural resource economist, focusing again on biodiversity and climate change that are her main focus and areas of work. So I leave the floor to Romina for giving this overview of the RDR. Romina, you have 6 minutes now, not 7 anymore, and I will signal you 1 minute to the end of the presentation. The floor is yours.
Sarah. Thanks a lot, Sarah. I will do my best. And I thank everyone for having been patient and waiting for us to get the event started. So let me share the screen. I will give a quick intro into the work that we have conducted to the preparation of the Rural Development Report, which will be released now. We have a date. It will be released the 21st of September. And colleagues that have worked with me on the preparation of the Rural Development Report are here today. And they will give a deeper dive into specific topics that we have considered and have elaborated in the RDR. Very briefly, I'd like to share with you the framework that we have followed to elaborate the Rural Development Report, starting from what are the outcomes that we try to achieve, what would we like to see from a transformed food system. especially coming from an IFAD perspective, whereby our mandate is to work with the rural poor to improve their prosperity and their livelihood. The approach that we followed was to achieve the three outcomes of a better and more inclusive livelihood, of a better nutrition that is not working only on calories, but also on the quality and diversification of food, and also and not last but not least, on the environment, for which we have already seen a lot of impacts coming during the summer from climate. All these things together, bearing in mind the importance of resilience, and of course, if all these three aspects are achieved in synergies, resilience is also in the front and center of these approaches. We then consider what are the pathways that can lead to such an outcomes, these three outcomes, and I will elaborate briefly on that. And then finally, what is needed to align the foundations to achieve this change. So on the food system outcomes, which is our first triangle, as I said, these are our outcomes, and the reason is in front of all of us, and it's starting from the fact that for climate and environment, we know that the food system as it currently performs contribute to 37% of global greenhouse gas emission. It's a major source of water and environmental pollution, deforestation, soil erosion, and biodiversity loss. And also we know from the most recent reports that have been released that the environmental footprint coming from the current use of food system may almost double between now and 2050. In terms of nutrition and human health, we've seen a triple burden. So on one side, there are still a lot of people that are hungry, although there's been a progress in hunger, but with COVID, things seems to be getting worse. We also have food insecurity, stunting, and children wasted. But at the same time, with the triple burden is coming from overweight and obesity, whereby we see 1.9 billion adults that are overweight and 650 million obese. But the third burden is that what we call hidden hunger of micronutrient deficiencies, because there are also a lot of people suffering from that. And that you can see from this slide, where you see that whereby hunger and undernutrition has diminished in terms of number of countries, it has done so at the burden of overweight and obesity. So the challenge is to reduce undernutrition and ensure food security, but not at the expense of overweight and obesity on the other side. Finally, in terms of livelihood, it's important, especially from our perspective, to say that more than 1/3 of the world's people derive their livelihood directly from food system. That still 3.2 billion people live in rural areas and depend on agriculture and food system for their livelihoods. And that food system affects about 500,000 small-scale farmers. Of these, it's important to say that many 2 hectares of land, but they still produce 20% of our food, so they are of key importance. So what are the pathways to achieve these objectives, these outcomes that we would like to see? Well, first and foremost, it's important to say that we still need to work on agriculture. We still need to increase about 20-30% of agricultural production by 2050. And so agriculture, increasing productive farming still remain one key objective. However, and
I mean, 1 minute left.
1 minute. However, there is a lot of opportunities that you can see from coming off farm and from wage labor outside of agriculture. It's more relevant in Latin America, but you can also see there are still huge opportunities in Africa and Asia. Of course, for the poorest of the poor and for those that have less access to resources, social protection remain a key aspects to a key initiative to put in place to help them out of poverty. And overall, diversified livelihood is at the center of objectives to ensure better livelihood for everyone. Finally, in terms of this I don't have time to go through. In terms of aligning the foundation for change, we all know what's needed, but it's important to put these activities in place. First and foremost, catalytic governance, because a failure of food system is a failure of governance, and it's important in this regard to get the momentum going. And we believe that the initiatives, the dialogues, the opportunities, the alliances there are ongoing from that led to the pre-summit and then they're ongoing to the summit offer a good opportunity. It's important to use evidence to guide action and demonstrate progress. So it's important to strengthen national data, statistical system, and integrated analysis. And in this regard, the 50 by 2030 is a good example of using a better and wider statistical system. And of course, cooperation and a wide constituency across all stakeholders. And again, the food system is a good opportunity there. Of course, innovation and entrepreneurship are key. Tommaso will also talk about digitalization. Another two key aspects are gender equality, women's empowerment, and youth-centered rural transformation, without going into the details here, but these are all key aspects that we need to bear in mind. So, still important, agriculture, focus on productivity, small and medium enterprise and diversification are the source of opportunities for a transformed food system with the outcomes we'd like to see. And finally, bear in mind social protection for resilience. And this is all from my side. I try to be as fast as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Romina. The RDR is a very important publication, and it was a huge effort conducted by IFAD with Wageningen. It's extremely complicated to summarize it in 6 minutes, but thank you, Romina, for using at your best the time allocated to make this overview. And now we're going to move to the other presenter that have contributed also to the development of the RDR. And the next one is Jim Woodhill, who will make a presentation on key issues related to ensuring that the rural poor will be included and benefit from food system transformation. So we're going to look at key emerging issues for inclusivity and equitability. Jim is a specialist on food system, inclusive agribusiness, development policy, and multi-stakeholder partnership. With more than 30 years of international experience, he's currently based in Oxford as an independent consultant. He's also UK and honorary research associate with Oxford University Environmental Change Institute and honorary associate with the Institute of Development Studies. Is part-time director of the UKF CDO Knowledge for Development program. Jim, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes, and I'm going to signal you 1 minute to the end.
Thank you. Good afternoon, good morning, people. I'm just checking whether my screen is coming up as it should. Okay, swap displays. I think that should be working, is it, Sarah? Good. Thank you. And given the technical delays, I'll try and keep this as brief as possible. And I'd like to make 3 main points about connecting rural people into the opportunities from food systems transformation. And I think the first one, and Romina's already mentioned this, is around the critical need we have for much more disaggregated and nuanced data on rural poverty, on the role of small-scale agriculture and people's livelihoods. I think if we want to get governance right, if we want to empower rural people to take opportunities, we have to have a much better understanding of that, and I'll explain that with an example in a moment. I'd like to talk about a broader set of dimensions for productive agriculture, and then I'd like to come back and just talk briefly about the challenge of actually creating food system value for rural areas. I'm just coming back to a slide that Romina has already showed, understanding just how diversified rural people's livelihoods are becoming. And I think sometimes it's too easy for, perhaps not specialists in the field, but those outside the field to just assume that rural people are farmers and that rural poor people are in farmers. In fact, many rural people have an increasing diversified livelihood, both as farmers in the agri-food system and in the wider rural economy. And understanding the dynamics of that is actually really, really critical, particularly around issues of gender as well and the role of youth. We don't have this understanding unpacked very well at national and local level. So this is global aggregate data, but just to make the point how diversified rural people's livelihoods are coming. To take that a step further here, in the Rural Development Report, we looked at a number of the issues around farm size and production. And I guess the point I'd like to make from this slide is that while we often talk about small-scale agriculture producing something like 70% of food consumed in low and middle-income countries, actually we've got a group of slightly larger small-scale farmers who are producing a lot, and a very large group of very small-scale farmers who don't produce so much, but who are still very dependent on agriculture, but also very dependent on off-farm income for their livelihoods, because their chances of actually making an income and escaping poverty from agriculture alone are limited. So this whole analysis makes it critically important to understand these dynamics in rural areas, and very, very important to try and understand where people's livelihoods can be improved, both on and off-farm income, and recognizing the need for a much more integrated approach around how agriculture and working in value chains links into improving people's livelihoods. Again, we're lacking data around what this situation actually looks like at local and country levels. We're lacking data around what this picture looks like for youth or for gender or for other particular groups. So if we think about this from the production side and agriculture, I'd just like to highlight perhaps 4 ways we need to be thinking around the future of small-scale agriculture still as a really important part. The first one, which we often hear a lot around, is obviously important of commercialization for meeting urban food demand. But we also need to recognize that if a lot of farmers are actually already doing some off-farm income earning, perhaps semi-commercialization, linking farm production into a much wider set of livelihoods becomes an important option. And that has different demands in terms of the support they need than if you're being fully commercial and farming as your own enterprise. Also, if people are earning off-farm income, production for self-consumption and for nutrition and for coping for crises like COVID-19 is very important, and we need to make sure that the production for self-consumption gets attention. And finally, the whole critical area about providing ecosystem services and how that provides another dimension of supporting rural people's livelihoods. So with all of that, in terms of inclusion in food systems transformation, let me make 4 final points here. The first one is, how do we keep a really sharp focus on creating and capturing food system value in rural areas? As we develop food chains, as more and more food gets added value and taken into urban areas, the whole theme of this year's AGRF, what's needed to make sure that the value from that is actually captured in rural communities, in rural households, in rural enterprises, and isn't captured by investors from outside the rural area. To do that, there is a need for support across a diversified set of livelihoods across the whole food system. So thinking how you're supporting those in the middle of the value chain, farmers, and so on. All of this comes back to the core issue that we've heard over and over again about investing in rural areas, in infrastructure, in education, in health services, etc. And finally, recognizing that driving all of this sits way outside just the food system. I mean, at a global level, at a national level, a real transition to much more smart subsidies that drive the sort of outcomes we want from a food system and put the economic incentives place to change that. So tackling rural poverty then becomes way beyond just rural projects, but really trying to understand how the system evolves, which I think is the critical value of the Global Food Systems Summit, of bringing these issues to people's attention. Let me stop there and hope we've got a bit of time for discussion at the end.
Jim, thank you so much, because I wanted to signal 1 minute, but you made it on time. I wonder whether you want me to make the question now, or you can continue until the end of the presentation so that the question comes next.
You can have a quick question and then I'll see if I can stay on or not.
Okay, so the quick question is that are there trade-offs between including the rural poor and reaching other objectives of the food system transformation, like environmental and nutritional?
To a degree, but I mean, I think there are also a lot of synergies. I think the trade-offs actually become in a bigger frame. So if you think about, where do governments invest resources? Do they invest resources into urban areas? Do they invest resources into staple crops or into more higher value nutritional crops? So I think, yes, while there are some trade-offs between environment, nutrition and livelihoods, I think actually the trade-offs that we need to tackle are around bigger trade-offs in society, and what the long-term benefits are of having a prosperous rural area that's meeting our sort of environmental needs as well. But it's a very long story, the trade-offs one, but a very critical thing to look at. And again, we need the data to be able to do that.
Thank you very much, Jim, and thank you for trying to address in such a short time all these challenging facets. So now we move to the next speaker, and I hope you can stay with us. Otherwise, I hope you to see in another event, and thanks for your participation. So now we move to the next presenter, Leslie Lieber, who is going to present in 6 minutes, if possible, the trade-off and impact on the environment. And Leslie is a natural resource economist who has worked for more than 30 years in the field of sustainable agriculture development. She holds a doctorate in agriculture and resource economics from the University of California at Berkeley, and she was the director of the Independent Science and Partnership Council of the CGIAR from 2016 to 2019, and the senior environmental economist at FAO for over 10 years. Currently, she holds a visiting fellow position at Cornell University, and she's a technical advisor to the CERES 2030 project and senior advisor to IFAD on the 2021 RDR on food system transformation. Leslie, the floor is yours, 6 minutes, and I'm going to signal you 1 minute to the end.
Okay, thanks very much, Sarah. I'm afraid I have kind of a weak Wi-Fi connection, so even screen sharing, I just tried, and it was, I'm not going to do it. Also, because I've already shed about 10 slides in order to keep to a very short time. So let me just address the question that you just raised with Jim about trade-offs, particularly on the environment side, and how that was considered in the RDR 2021. I think, you know, in the context of food system transformation, there's multiple objectives. So Romina presented, we have the triangles, we have several, we have livelihood objectives, we have environment, we have nutritional. In looking at how do we deal with the environmental objectives of food system transformation, when we are concerned about rural prosperity and rural livelihoods that Jim also so clearly talked about, it's important to look at both the source and the impacts of the problem. So let's take climate change. Romina presented statistics. Food systems are a major source of emissions, between a quarter to a third, depending on what's included, and they're expected to grow unless there's a major change. That's really key. At the same time, the impacts of climate change are hitting very hard in the food system. The food system is very vulnerable to it, and particularly the livelihoods of rural poor people. So you have this dual sort of dual negative synergies. So it's important when we look at how to reduce the environmental impacts that we're very aware of the livelihood impacts and the need to deal with that in coming up with solutions so that the solutions are not actually augmenting the problem for the rural poor. And I think that comes out in several ways in the report and different kinds of environmental issues, both climate change, biodiversity, water use. In all cases, the food system is a major source of some of the environmental issues, but the people in the food system, particularly the vulnerable rural poor, are already feeling the impacts of these environmental degradation, and it's really key to think of the solutions in such a way that they actually contribute to those pathways of better livelihoods and they don't block it, so that you don't get a trade-off on trying to improve livelihoods while you're improving environment. One way the RDR did that was through a modeling exercise. I think maybe Ruud might raise this as well, in which this was looking at, okay, so if we put in a policy where we greatly reduce the price of fruit and vegetables, what is the impact of that across different kinds of people in the food system, producers, people working in the midstream, and consumers? And what would be the implication for rural livelihoods? And there were several of these scenarios that were built looking at, okay, what if we increase rural transformation, we increase food self-sufficiency, we look at massive reductions in consumption of meat. And in all these cases, you could see where there may be impacts on rural livelihoods and where it would be traced throughout the system, if it would be a producer or a midstream or a consumption. So this is one of the contributions of the RDR to looking at this issue. Another that's really key is a lot of the discussion around food systems transformation is global. You know, we have big problems. Food systems are not delivering nutrition, they're not delivering environment. But in fact, when you're looking at the solutions, and particularly the solutions that would give you the synergies, that would give you improved livelihoods while you're improving nutrition and the environment, this is really key to be looking at in a much more specific context. And as I think Jim raised this as well, so that part of what was done in the rural development report was to try to pull apart what are the key differences across contexts that would sort of help devise where the strategies for those pathways to improve rural livelihoods, how those could be synergistic with other objectives of the food system. And that's, I think I'll just stop there, but that's sort of to give you a nutshell of some of the thinking that went into the issues of balancing environmental objectives in the context of transforming food systems for rural prosperity. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Leslie. Again, thank you for addressing those issues and for complementing on Jim's presentation. And your knowledge and background on climate and environment are key, not only for the RDR, but also more importantly for this presentation today. And now we move to a representative of Wageningen, who has been a strong partner in this RDR, an important and strong partner in this RDR. And I would like to personally thank Ruud and colleague for making sure that the RDR was produced in time for all the events related to the food system. It has not been easy. So on the behalf of IFAD, I would really like to acknowledge this. And now, without further ado, because we have this strict deadline, I am unfortunately the one who has to respect all the timing. 6 minutes, Ruud, to summarize a long process, and in particular, to talk about the key drivers of nutrition and food insecurity, the need for transformation, diets, and health. Few words about Ruud, even if it doesn't need introduction, because Ruud is Emeritus Professor, Impact Analysis of Food System at Wageningen University. He has served before as Director of the Independent Policy Operation Evaluation Department at the Netherlands Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as Professor of Development Studies and Director of the Center for International Development Issues at Rabbu University, Nijmegen. Ruud worked many years in Central America, East and West Africa, and China on policy research related to food system, impact evaluation, effectiveness of incentive, and the impact of standard and certification. He has supervised 40 PhD students, published more than 100 articles in peer-reviewed journal, and co-edited 10 books with academic publishers. So you see that Ruud has really a balance between policy and research. Without further ado, Ruud, you have 6 minutes, and I'm going to signal you 1 minute to the end.
Yeah, thanks very much, Sarah. It makes me nervous if you introduce me in this way. It was a real pleasure for the colleagues at Wageningen University to work together with IFAD on this RDR. And there are several reasons for that, but we believe that this is really a landmark publication that indicates a little bit the change in thinking about the functions of rural development, and particularly in an effort to link agricultural production with nutrition and with health. And that's relatively new. So I will talk a little bit more about the consumption side, the linkages between food production, nutrition, and health in food systems, and what can be done to change food systems, not only from the producer side, but also from the consumer side. And there are a few issues that are important for better understanding that. First, as Romina already indicated, let's say our traditional concern was always hunger and undernutrition. And there are big numbers over there, more than 700 million people, and that's growing because of COVID. But the other two dimensions of the food problem, micronutrient deficiencies and overweight, are becoming more and more important. And these problems are also affecting particularly poor people. So now we notice in a couple of, let's say, low and low middle income countries that there are many more deaths due to overweight and deficiency, micronutrient deficiency, than just undernutrition. And the problems are also interlinked. We didn't know that in the past, but let's say people that have suffered from malnutrition in the early part of their lives are very vulnerable to overweight and obesity later on. So you have to work on different sides of the nutrition angle. And the most important contribution now of food production is not only the product, but the diet. The fact that with a better diet, you can substantially reduce the vulnerability for diseases, also new diseases in a way, let's say diabetes, heart failures, etc., that are very expensive for the public health system. And we made some calculations that say if you invest $1 in a better diet, that you might save about $17 in health costs. So the farmer becomes more than just a producer of food, he becomes a little bit a medical doctor. And that's a new way of thinking about farming. Second issue already mentioned by previous speaker, we used to look a little at availability of food and access of food, if there is sufficient food available for everybody. That still remains important, but a new issue is taking far more attention, which is the affordability of food. So even if we have enough food, people cannot afford to pay for that. And healthy diets are generally more expensive than the common diets. So some calculations recently based on the Eat Lancet study on, let's say, what we consider a healthy diet indicated that 2.5 billion people just don't have the income to pay for a healthy diet, and which is a very simple plate with a little bit of staples and cereals and vegetables and some meat, but very small proportions. So if you have to spend a large part of your income on food and on diet, there is no room for other investments in transport, in housing, and etc. So the big concern about affordability is perhaps now a greater issue that deserves attention than just the availability. And that also implies that we should not look only at the production side, but also on how production reaches the consumer and whether we can improve efficiencies in what we call the supply chain, everything between production and consumption. And there are very large margins there, because about 60 to 80% of the price that the consumer paid is spent on supply chain activities, trading, transport, storage, sometimes processing, etc. So improving midstream, not only primary production, is a very good instrument for making food more affordable. So the third observation, I think Leslie has done that already in a very nice way. We used to think that healthy diets are might affect the environment. But there is quite some modeling work nowadays that looks at the outcomes of, let's say, consumption patterns that are based on dietary guidelines. And in general, I think we believe that there is a good possibility to produce healthy food in an environmental sustainable way. And for those situations where that is not possible, we can rely on what is called true pricing, bringing in the environmental externalities of the food production into the price, and then having also funds for investment in potential compensation of environmental externalities. Now, to conclude, the key issue of the report, of course, is not just to paint the problem, but to give an idea on how to solve it, how to address the food transformation agenda. Traditionally, many investments have been made in technologies, in innovation for farmers, and also very modern innovation nowadays, gene editing, etc. But it is increasingly important, as Jim outlined, to enable farmers to engage in this intensification process through land rights, through water rights, and also to invest in more risky products, and vegetables and poultry and aquaculture, which are very critical for diets, are also risky products. So the discussion at the very end of the report is whether we should push a system transformation or whether we should look at the pull side, how to support consumer demand that focuses on healthier diet through all types of public investment, social safety nets, sometimes public procurement, school meals, hospital meals, etc. And that is not an easy issue. You cannot leave the change only to the consumer. You also need governance. And governance means that you have to look also at power relationship. The first power relationship we know in nutrition is gender empowerment. Women decide about production, consumption, what's on the plate. But there is more empowerment needed also in other arenas, in the relationship between the private sector and the public sector, discussions about taxes on fat and on sugar, discussions on labeling of products to show whether they are healthy and also sustainable. So there is a whole arena, and I hope that after the Food System Summit, at least we know about how this arena is structured, and that all organizations, including IFAD, has the courage to transform the power relationships underlying the food systems. Yeah, so back to you, Sarah.
Thank you very much for it. And I have to say again, after your presentation, that IFAD has been really lucky to have collaborated with Wageningen and to really have supported about the background papers that were useful for this publication, that were highlighting all these facets that you have presented that are hardly seen in publication and in the policy debate. So I really hope that this will help to facilitating and also shaping the discussion in the future. And then now we move to the last presenter before we open the floor for a very quick but constructive discussion. Tommaso Ceccarelli will talk about digital technology, innovation, and new opportunities in, again, 6 minutes. Tommaso is senior researcher at Wageningen University, and he has over 30 years of experience in the area of food security and rural development, and in the application of ICT to agriculture in low and middle income countries and Europe. Is currently coordinating the ecosystem support and capacity development component of the Digital Agri-Hub, a project funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, USAID, and FCDO. Together with Samia, this complicated Kana, Francesco Checchi, and Sandan Jansen, is the author of a background paper of the IFAD 2021 RDR on ICT and food system transformation. Tommaso, the floor is yours in 6 minutes, and I will signal you 1 minute to the end.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I don't know if I'm trying to share my screen, but it's not clear to me if I'm doing that.
Just put in full screen mode.
Full screen mode. Okay.
And it should work.
Not sure if it.
Yeah, it's working.
Yep.
It's working.
Okay, thank you very much. So you already mentioned that I'm sharing, presenting also on behalf of the co-authors of this background publication, and then say the what is more of interest is the fact that we all consider what we call actually D for Ag, digitalization for agriculture, and which implies that it's not just about technologies, but about digitalization processes and solutions as such. I think we all consider this as being an important driver in food system transformation, particularly across the food value chain components, but also more and more across food environment and consumer behavior in terms of information, in terms of promotion, so behavioral change, and ultimately, indeed, affecting food system outcomes, sustainability, resilience, inclusiveness, and as it was mentioned by the previous speakers, also nutrition, and therefore informing or representing an important element in the pathway to change, towards change. Digital agriculture, digital for agriculture and innovation. This is of interest. This scheme, of course, tries to map them all, but potentially look at what is potentially more important for transformative technologies, artificial intelligence, machine learning, etc., all nice, but a kind of important question is, what is the technical readiness of these technologies, and moreover, what is their fitness to our specific purposes? But this being said, we all think there is clear evidence that D4Ag are transforming, are a driver to transformation of the system. There is evidence that, as we all know, I guess, mobile phone penetration, internet penetration, and mobile broadband are happening, and also with the penetration rate, which is striking close to that of basic needs, such as water, electricity, even more, according to statistics, to secondary school and sanitation. However, this comes with geographical divides. We see from the map where these divides happen and occur. The prospects, though, are for a brighter future in a way, because, for instance, mobile broadband is predicted to reach 70% of sub-Saharan population by 2025. And this is a fact due to infrastructural development, but also because behind this there is a strong push we call the digital natives push, which means that we're predicting that a young and fast-growing generation population will drive mobile broadband connectivity. And this brings about opportunities. This is paving the way for more sophisticated digital solution, better connectivity. And if I can borrow a sentence from Ismail Sunga, who is the CEO of SACAO, the Farmers Association of Southern Africa, we need to think futuristic for the new generation of farmers. I'm extending now this notion to food system actors altogether, who will handle more digital complexity. They have to do it in a more competitive and more connected world. Another emergent, but yet unexplored impact pathway is towards bundling of digital solutions, serving the whole farmers ecosystem, based on increasingly solid business proposition by service providers. So these, in combination with, as we said, physical infrastructure, but very importantly still human last mile networks, will have this, we are sure, we are confident, this transformative role. However, what about inclusiveness and equity? Again, borrowing from Ismail, I'm going to pay him some royalties sooner or later. D4Ag is a very sexy subject, but there is a tendency to go for the more sophisticated technology. And do they really match fundamental pain points? We need not to be too distant from small scale farmers' needs. We need to be very practical, to devise very simple solution to the main problem. Moreover, will the most disadvantaged communities and segments within be served by such solutions? Solution providers, we have recently engaged with a number of them, we know need support from governments, impact investors, NGOs, as their commercial value propositions are likely not to be sufficient in these cases, although solid, as we just said. Also, will local innovative service providers be kind of threatened by big global players appearing and what we call super platforms? We feel that the former are closer to our needs. We need policy and regulatory frameworks to ensure an equal playing field, taking stock of the value that both can bring about. Just to conclude,
1 minute,
I'd like to,
yeah.
I'll make it shorter. Thank you, Sarah. Just to conclude, just want to mention an initiative that you mentioned already, introducing me, thank you, which is called the Digital Agri-Hub. This is continuing the work that maybe some of you know already done by the CTA. And it's about keep tracking and assessing the impact of these developments, promoting collaborative actions, networking, awareness creation and skill development around these. I've given you some references there, and please keep us working on this important initiative. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tommaso. And also in your case, it's impossible to summarize in 5 minutes all the interlinkage that exist in technology and digital agriculture. And as you said correctly, digital agriculture is the future. And the jump that has taken place with the COVID will have strong consequences also in the food system. And therefore, a closer look at what is happening there is needed. So we're already late, but I would kindly suggest that we take some of the questions were from the floor were already answered by our panelists, and I would like to thank Ruud and Leslie for doing this. What I would do is that I will make a question each, and I will ask each of you to answer, to get back to me in 30 seconds. 45, maybe less than a minute, please, on a quick roundtable discussion to at least animate a little bit of interaction among us on those important issues. And so let me start with Romina. And Romina, but do you inclusivity, everybody is talking about inclusiveness, and do you think that inclusion of rural poor is being given enough attention in the global discussion around each of those areas and thematic areas?
I think that it has increasingly been taken into account. I believe a lot of what triggered the food system was also related to earlier report, which had a stronger focus around the environmental and around the nutrition angle. But I think the poverty angle has been catching up, especially in the last year and I think the rural development report itself is a great contribution to shed some light and emphasize that the global objectives of having a better and more equitable nutrition and not at the expense of the environment and climate should also not happen at the expense of the poor, and in particular of the rural poor. So the breakdown of where they are located, where do they work, the role of agriculture and of diversification is playing a great role within the RDR. Of course, there have been also other important reports in that regard, but we are making our good contribution in that regard, I think.
Thank you very much, Romina. And I already asked a question to Jim because I thought he was leaving, and it was also nice to have Leslie also raising on what Jim started to reply. Jim, do you have any other input you want to share with our audience today?
I think just to reinforce the critical need to make sure that value in the wider food system can flow back into rural areas, not just in terms of people participating in farming or in food systems, as Ruth mentioned, but also in driving the wider rural economy that's going to be really critical. And I think we have really interesting opportunities here because actually urbanization is often happening in rural areas. So I think we need to shift away from the idea of very large cities and also understand this much stronger connection between urban areas and rural areas, if you like, a territorial approach to development, and how all that can connect together in creating a much broader range of opportunities for tackling rural poverty and overcoming rural inequality.
Thank you very much. Peri-urban area, urbanization in rural area those are all extremely important issues to take into account in the future. And now, Leslie, the turn is yours to see whether there are any trade-off between achieving production, consumption, market, and ecological footprints, and what are opportunities for synergies?
Oh, that's an easy question to answer in 45 seconds. Yes, there are trade-offs. The trade-offs, though, a lot of times are generated by existing policies and investment patterns. So there's a lot of opportunity to change with changes in the policy regime. So if you start looking at food system outcomes as more than just getting the maximum amount of food, then you would change the policy regime, and that could very much be important in reducing the kinds of trade-offs. Sarah, tell me again, what was the second part of the question?
Do you see synergies? What about opportunities for synergies among production, consumption, market, and ecological footprint?
Yeah, and some of this came up in the chat, sorry. One of the ones I have to admit it is my personal great interest. If fertilizer use is a major source, inorganic fertilizer use is a major source of nitrous oxide, which is a very potent greenhouse gas. And it's an important part of reducing emissions. However, a lot of places are using too much, whereas some places aren't using enough. And it's pretty key for small scale farmers, particularly the ones that are market oriented, as Jim talked about, to have better access, but better efficiency of use, so that they're increasing use, but they're increasing the efficiency of use, which means you're reducing the emissions per unit used. That's really key. This kinds of things is where you can get win-win solutions. Another big one that's talked about quite a bit in the report is this need to diversify the food supply and what the opportunities are for small scale farmers to get into a wider range of production opportunities, which would have implications also for the resilience of the production system, but also of their livelihoods. And there's lots of potential there for win-win options.
Thank you, Leslie. And as you correctly point out, those interventions should deserve at least a 1 hour session each, because we're trying to give the nuts and bolts of the RDR, which is a huge publication that has raised many interesting topics. So I'm sorry for this 45 seconds, and I'm confident that Romina Roord and colleague will launch other events in the next coming weeks to present one by one all the important topics that are raised in the RDR. So last but not least, Tommaso, the floor is yours again to try to answer in 45 minutes in this never-ending and mare magnum area of new work related to digital and digital agriculture and technology. So, Tommaso, what investment do you think should be made to fourth digital innovation, and what are the risks of missing this opportunity?
Okay, yeah, well, financial investments, of course, maybe goes without saying, increasing the investment in digital broadband connectivity, but not to the detriment of other important rural investments. More immaterial investment, well, we said that there is the risk that maybe a few dominant important players are, generating monopolistic positions also in this field. So try to favor matchmaking between smaller solution providers, local solution providers, with impact investors, public investors, also to promote be serving the more vulnerable communities and areas. Last but not least, a kind of digital, well, literacy/digital literacy agenda is very important. Otherwise, we'll make a beautiful technological solution no one will use. So that's really in a nutshell. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tommaso. And I would add, if you allow me, in your case, that a better and stronger coordination among international financial institutions is needed for two reasons. First, to avoid overlap of same digital investment in areas, because digital investment are extremely expensive, and therefore specialization really and organization of financing towards this type of resources is needed in order to maximize the output. And then organizing also not only bring the digital infrastructure, but then also to bring all whatever is needed to foster the food system. I know that we have a few more minutes left, but I also know that many of our speakers were already involved in other sessions. So I think it's time to close. I would like to, I realize I didn't introduce myself. I've been speaking more than others. If I sum all the intervention of this session, I'm just Sara Savastano. I'm the director of the Research and Impact Assessment Division, where also Romina works and coordinates the impact assessment. And together with her, I'm sure and I'm confident that I'm reporting our message that more work and research on evidence on all these topics related to the climate change, to the food system transformation, because we are in a new agriculture revolution. And therefore, the agriculture sector is different from what it used to be in the 70s. And that brought about all the concept of structural transformation programs of the international financial institution. We are in a new era. We have a new agriculture sector, new challenge, and a strong work is requested by the research center to produce evidence can feed the policy debate. And with Romina, we are strong determined in IFAD and in RIA to promote this type of work, and we hope to continue to do that in the future. So, and with this, I really thank all the participants to this session, the speakers, the participant, the patient, and the technical people who have helped us solving the initial technical issues. Again, I'm sorry for this. I invite all of you to stay tuned on IFAD, because Romina will for sure organize other events related to the food system and to the RDR, because this is a big work and this is only the beginning. Actually, we're launching the moment where the dissemination of this publication is going to take place. So thanks to everybody, and I hope to see you soon. Bye.